Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We're talking about zero trust architecture, and we were just going over the top line, if you will, on where we are, sort of a state of the state. Tony, we think about Lookout, and we know this is a company that sort of dominates the mobile end space there, but Lookout's a lot bigger than that, and thankfully, right, because we have an entire architecture that we have to roll out here. Give us a top line as to what's happening at Lookout and what's going on with zero trust architecture.
Sure. Thanks, Luke. Yeah, as you stated, Lookout has its roots based in mobile threat defense. Been doing that about 14 years, and we've expanded our portfolio into the SASE space, which is certainly relevant as we talk about zero trust architecture. The secure access service edge portfolio of solutions, it really fits well within zero trust architecture around kind of three main pieces. One is securing legacy enterprise applications with solutions like ZTNA, which is typically used for VPN replacement. CASB, which is quite familiar probably to most people, which is securing commercial cloud applications, and also secure web gateway. And really the premise of zero trust is the fact that the perimeter is gone. The data resides outside the network, and frankly, we reside outside the network, which further exacerbated by the pandemic. I think there was we heard some commentary early, which I certainly agree with, that zero trust has been in the making for some time, and people have effectively been moving towards a lot of those types of solutions and securing their networks. But the pandemic forced all of us at home and many times on mobile devices. So I think one of the key elements here is starting with the endpoint and taking it all the way through the cloud. And today, 70% of all internet data is accessed by a mobile device, yet only roughly 1/3 of all devices have some sort of mobile security on them. So I think as with work from home possibly being a permanent fixture for many, certainly many in the private sector, but many in the public sector as well, I think not only the endpoint, but the mobile endpoint needs to be well cared for and thought of as part of any zero trust architecture. The other notion around this SASE technology, many folks, both private and public sector, look to Gartner for a lot of the intelligence around these types of things. Gartner, I think a point of note here that their magic quadrant for the SASE technology. First of all, they're likely to rename it SSE. So if you see the terminology SSE, that's they're going to drop the A. It'll be Secure Service Edge, but they're building one just for SSE and not separately for the other types of cloud solutions I mentioned previously. So the thought behind that is, as a user, private or public sector, you might be on a legacy commercial application, shift to something like an Office 365 fully commercial cloud application, and then browse the web. And you want to be able to, as a user and as an administrator, you want a good experience for your employees and be able to do that seamlessly across through a single proxy. So Gartner's really picked up on that, and they're only looking to evaluate companies that have really all three of those technologies. So best in breed works in certain areas of technology, and I know everybody here has probably done that. I think as we begin to look at some of these cloud security solutions, the level of complexity, policy management, and the user experience potentially degrades when you start to look at multiple solutions in those types of categories. So real interesting what we're going to see out of Gartner. And I think that they're certainly going to provide some additional color around what all of you, public and private sector, are doing around zero trust.
And no doubt that the evolution of as they start to suss this out in the zero trust maturity model and the cloud security technical reference architecture, that they're closing out those public comments, and we'll soon publish that. I think will help in sort of putting a fine point on this. Shane, let's roll back over to you. You all, again, as cited, have been very aggressive in rolling out these various capabilities, and undoubtedly had to start, building out the zero trust architecture. Lots of different pieces of this. It was cited 5 different elements. Give us if you want to highlight one piece of the program that you'd like to highlight, and just tell us about what's going on with that. Maybe even sort of what you've discovered there, what's working, what maybe is not working.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's funny, we were started doing zero trust before we realized we were doing zero trust, primarily driven by need, and just realization that the way the cloud operates, I don't see cloud as more secure or less secure than prem. It's just different, and understanding the differences was critical for us. Fortunately for me, well, sort of fortunately, we had a number of incidents and close calls that brought home the message that we needed to change the way we do stuff. Automation, I think, was the first thing that really hit home, especially with cloud technologies. The realization that the scale, scope, and speed at which cloud operates was well beyond our well beyond our resources. It just wasn't something we were capable of doing. The idea of watching screens for alerts had to go. So we had started investing, bit by bit, kind of taking an agile approach, where you start small, you sort of fail forward, you expect failure, you learn from failure, and you keep going. And maybe you only do a little tiny thing here and a little tiny thing there, but all those things add up over time. Automation was one of the key pieces that we started into, primarily because of cloud, but it became obvious to us very quickly that it was going to be critical to identity as well. USCIS established the Center of Excellence for it for DHS and has helped really drive the security automation piece home. I think my SOC now, because we track the automations and we use the labor hours of those automations that would have normally cost us had we not had the automation in place. I think we're doing about $20 million a year in savings right now in automation. And it's just continually to grow. So I think for me and for USCIS in general, automation was critical, and not just in the SOC, it had to be expanded. And so right now we're in the process of automating larger segments of the security program itself. The FISMA controls and alignments there, even documentation. We've finally started doing that part of it. I'm done having people write Word documents and submitting them over and over and over again. So automating those portions and parts of the security program are also just as critical, because you need to free up those resources to focus on the things you don't know about, and focus on those unknown threats as opposed to the knowns.
Automating very key, and also, obviously being able to operate at machine speed, right? I mean, that's the reality of the environment that we're in. Chris, how about over at Quest? Give us you have an opportunity to stripe across all these various agencies. Give us an example of one program you'd like to highlight that you would want to recognize.
Sure, I'm going to feed off my last comments around our aging infrastructure and technical debt. That is, when we walk into a customer's data center, they're looking for a solution typically for the most prevalent application or system. And my questions usually formulate around, well, what's supporting that particular application or system? And we found that one very large agency, and they were security oriented, from a national perspective, is that they processed so many transactions that they were dependent on a couple of specific types of systems that were based on versions of Unix that, quite frankly, just really weren't heavily supported when it comes to modern security architectures. And they asked us, well, can you protect and can you, insulate or isolate identities on these particular platforms? And where most agencies have migrated to Active Directory and ICAM and more modern identity systems, they still had these legacy Unix systems, and they weren't going away, because if they went away, I think a lot of us would actually be impacted based on what they did. So we actually came up with a solution where we actually had something that will do what we call privilege access management, and privilege session management for those Unix machines. And we were able to, with with a lot of political consternation and discussion, get the Unix administrators to let someone else determine when they would be able to access those systems. If you've ever worked with Unix administrators, and I used to be one, and so some of you may have, they don't like giving up God mode or keys to the kingdom. So we were able to come up with a just-in-time admin super user account process. So when they needed to do something or kill a daemon, for instance, on a system, or work on a process, or write a script, or change something at ring 0, for instance, we were able to provide that kind of access. It made a material difference because the amount of money it would have taken to re-architect, re-platform those Unix systems would have really been prohibitive for the agency at that particular time. And the dynamic nature of what they did, they would literally be changing an engine in flight to try to get those systems changed now. Now, fast forward, they're moving to AWS, they're moving to a containerized architecture. They've understood that that technical debt was a disaster. No, shouldn't say disaster, that's a bad word for them. But it was something that needed to change. And now that they're moving to a more modern architecture, it's a lot easier to start employing more industry accepted solutions. So as Tony was talking about what they do with Lookout, for instance, that is an entirely modern architecture. I look at what we're doing, for instance, across cloud and with ICAM and with sessions management, it's a lot easier now that they're moving to these architectures. And the fact that they're on a major cloud provider, for instance, it makes the integration of those things easier. And I think that's the thing that we overlook. When Shane talked about automating, if you're trying to automate something on PowerShell, or any old code base, for instance, it's very difficult. But once you have access to modern APIs or managed APIs, and you can get to data sets and get to those identities quickly, you can architect those systems and create a process that everyone can actually live with, and that even old Stone Age Unix administrators won't object to. So it was a happy ending. It's not a public case study, for instance, but we do talk about it when we can in situations like this. So back to you, Luke.
Yeah, modernizing our way into a more secure environment, and being able to give better capabilities to our citizens. Trifina, how about at SBA? You talked about quadrupling your workforce, had to move them out to COVID, scale up those environments. Now you're doubling down on all this architecture. How's it going? Give us a specific example, one piece of that you all are working on that you'd like to highlight.
Yeah, I want to highlight the asset pillar of Zero Trust. So, as you can imagine, you have 20,000 additional identities, but you also have 20,000 additional, not 20,000 additional, maybe 15,000 additional laptops or desktops, those endpoints. So now we're taking a step back and evaluating the architecture of that. And kind of what Shane was talking about, how can we leverage automation and figure out, okay, our risk appetites for these endpoints. With all of these endpoints out there, we need to evaluate, okay, does this endpoint have the right operating system? Does it have the right updates on it? Okay, can it connect to our network? And so we're trying to put in the policies in place that will allow a good baseline is what we're trying to implement, and being successful at it while also leveraging a CMDB, so that change configuration management database that will house all of those different changes. So it's all a centralized architecture that we're trying to implement. And I'd say it's going pretty well, but it leverages a lot of communication with the other program offices. At the SBA, there's a lot of, there's all kinds of different program offices that we have to communicate with, and we have to work together with. And so it's been a journey, but I think it will end well.
Right. And journey, I think the operative word, right? This is a very dynamic environment you're operating in there, and just keeping pace with that and coordinating all these various activities, super important. It sounds like you guys are off to a great start there. Tony, how about at Lookout? You cited that you have a lot of, well, let me step back and say you all are in the middle of a lot of different agencies. You're seeing a lot of different activities. Why don't you give us an example of one program that you're working on the Zero Trust architecture that you'd like to bring to the attention of our user population?
Yeah, it's a good question. We're working with one of the DoD agencies that's looking at. It's started out as a bring your own approved device BYOAD program, which we're seeing a lot of that. A lot of different agencies looking to replace GFE, get rid of the expensive and complexity of having a fleet of devices and trying to get the users to bring their own. The technology is there, right? Whether it's the device manager as well as the mobile threat defense type solution from Lookout is there. What we're seeing though with a couple of these programs is they started out specifically as to secure BYO devices, but now they've with Zero Trust on really a top of mind for everyone, they've expanded into looking at cloud security solutions as well, because those devices are now, particularly with so many people working from home and being outside the network and the data being outside the network, they're looking at cloud solutions for those devices as well as their other endpoints. So I think I'm pleased to see kind of this holistic approach where I certainly wouldn't call it previously as only point solutions, right? Because they're looking at a lot of things around mobile, but now the other things that they're looking at around mobile from a security perspective expand well beyond just the device itself and maybe what network it resides on. It's looking at the data at rest, data in transit, and then more of a continuous conditional access perspective. So really pleased to see that expansion and having that being top of mind in some of these traditional mobile programs.
Right. It really is an ecosystem. It's quite right. It's an architecture. And there's a lot of different pieces and parts of it that have to snap together and be laid out. Alper, speaking of architecture, again, we talked about the zero trust strategy, the maturity model that's out there, et cetera. A lot of good work going on to nail down the definitions of some of these things so that there's not 10 different agencies going in 10 different directions. Give us an example of where you are on one of the programs that you'd like to focus your attention on.
I mean, our focus is right now on this big project that we launched, and our goal is to put out some implementations out there as examples that allows us to demonstrate some of these different approaches that we describe in our document. And it's very important to do that right. And, giving examples and using the commercially available technologies, putting them out there will create a foundational starting point for a lot of the folks that are looking to move toward ZTAs. And so that's where our focus is. But what we're doing is basically we're taking the approach of crawl, walk, and run type of approach, where we're tackling a minimum viable implementation initially, because the assumption is that most folks out there will have some sort of endpoint security solutions on their endpoints. It's certainly people, some will have identity stores or some kind of identity management system in place. Some network security solutions in place. So we want to leverage all of those to start using a essentially identity management system to drive the zero trust policy enforcement aspect of things. And so that's our starting point, and that's where we're focusing on. Of course, the goal is to expand that into more complex versions of zero trust architectures, going into, for example, microsegmentation, and then software-defined perimeters. And of course, SASE, we'll be looking at that, proxying, giving access in that way. And the thing is, we have about 18 months to do all of this stuff. And, there's also the IoT aspect of things that we want to look at. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to do it on this particular phase. It might be the second phase that we follow on. But our path is definitely etched in stone at this point. And we just want to put out something out there that will bring value. And so that's where we are.
And no doubt that's going to be extremely helpful, because you hear so many times, look, I've got all these different pieces and part. I've got endpoint security. I have some sort of micro segmentation of sorts, or I don't have any. Where do I start, right? And I think having you all lay that down and give some examples is going to be really important and really critical to the community to move this forward. All right, we're going to take another short break, and we'll be right back. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network.